We're live.
We're live. Hello, good evening and welcome to the King's Fund. I'm Roy Lilley and welcome to this evening's Health Chat. We've got a very special guest lined up, but before I introduce our guest, could we just say thank you firstly to Interserve, who've been our sponsors and great friends and help us to bring these events to you, and of course to IMS Maxims, who tonight, we're very lucky, we're very fortunate to have with us from IMS Maxims Michael, who is going to say a few words of welcome. Michael, please. We must. A big round of applause for Michael. I want to say, I've got to get a train to Telford at 8:45, so if you just...
Did you bring your birdseed with you this time? Well, it's a great pleasure, obviously, to welcome Patrick, both as an ex-colleague and a friend, and given his current role, the importance for systems suppliers is enormous in that unless we measure properly, we're not going to know what's happening. And all too often at the moment we cannot get just simple statistics to know exactly how we're performing. So we'll be very interested to hear how that is currently shaping up in his view.
Oh, come on, give him the clap. He's so richly deserved. Let me see what I mean.
You asked me to be short.
Wait. He's here tonight. I can't believe it. It's Lord Carter of Bogroll, ladies and gentlemen.
I did ring Garter, King of Arms, who does these things, and asked him if I could do what Roy always says we should do, because you know that's the way to success. But he declined. So I'm stuck with my existing title. There you go.
Lord Carter of Bogroll. I quite like that. Patrick, thank you very much for joining us. You've had a busy day today. You've been in the house.
Yeah,
Watching the Queen, the State Open. What's it like? Is it? I mean, can you see anything? It's very crowded.
Do you know, I had a great seat. I could just see the top of her crown.
I saw more on the telly.
And that's a bad thing because she's short now and I'm short, so I couldn't quite see over the heads of the ambassadors. But if anybody's ever been to it, it's a very glittering occasion, and it's characterised by people having to put a hired robe on because they cost 8,000 quid to buy one, and very few people actually buy one unless they're up themselves. And everybody else rents one for 100 quid, and it's quite good business. And then you get the partners come in, and when I first started going 12 years ago, there were lots and lots of tiaras, and it was a sort of tiara competition, and people used to sort of rate it, you know. And somehow in this increasingly democratic society, the tiaras have got more and more modest. And it's quite interesting to watch that. One of the good things about the House of Lords is the number of women. And it just has a dramatic effect on behaviour. It's so much better. I've never been in the Commons, but people tell me, my own observation is that the presence of a number of women peers actually alters the balance of it, and it makes it a much better place to work.
Speaking to Tanny Gray Thompson the other day, she was talking about getting around in a wheelchair. And she said the bad thing about the House of Lords is the carpets are too thick, because when you're in a wheelchair, you can't wheelie anywhere with a wheelchair.
That's true, but of course, I'm on the committee which is going to make a recommendation about rebuilding it. And one of the big issues of the Palace of Westminster, of course, is wheelchair access. And it's appalling. I mean, it was finished in 1848, so
did have wheelchairs.
Maybe one would be forgiven because everybody was dead before they needed a wheelchair. But we've certainly got to do something about that.
So what's going to happen? Is it all going to move to Birmingham?
There are options.
Which one are you going to pick?
No, I'm a member of a committee. I couldn't possibly bind the committee, you know that. All I would tell you is there are three options. One is to do a total decant, move everybody out. The second is to do what they did after the war. People may know the Chamber of the House of Commons got bombed in 1942, and they went into the Lords, and the Lords went into an adjacent building, but that is a possibility. And the third is just to do it gradually over 30 years.
Or the fourth is to close it down.
Yeah, well, many people would like that. I mean, you could certainly streamline government for a bit.
Yeah, for a bit.
Well, you know, I mean, democracy usually works, doesn't it?
Well, in the end, was it Churchill who said that they've tried everything, we try everything else? And no, that was, we were talking about the American system of government. We were talking about that. I don't know. I mean, it is an anachronism, but it's a splendid anachronism, and it seems to sort of work, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at these parliaments have got one chamber, Hungary and places particularly you think of, is you do need a check and balance constitutionally. I mean, the strange thing is the Lords are not being elected. But on the other hand, you've got this supremacy of the Commons. And really, I don't think the Commons want somebody else to challenge them. You know, they're the guys who do it all. We just check it. So, you know, there's a great constitutional debate to come on that. And we've avoided it for years. And we seem to get by. So,
could we just speak up a little?
Yes,
People at the back are just struggling a little
oh,
bit.
yeah, oh, right. Well, shall we pretend we haven't got a microphone?
That's a very good idea,
great.
yeah.
Okay.
Big breaths.
Yeah, come on.
Right, okay, make a bit of an effort. I don't know, I'm in two minds about it. I mean, and we all certainly seem to get a funny lot of people in the House of Lords now.
Well, thank you, Roy.
Strange bunch.
But you know, you say that, but actually, if you look at, it's funny you say, I was looking across today at the sort of composition of it. I mean, we have great clinicians, we have people with distinguished things, we have distinguished researchers, we have distinguished lawyers, and inevitably in it all, you get some hacks. I mean, you get people who've actually been helpful to the party, possibly financially or whatever. But what's really interesting, when people do, you know, and I've been chairman of a number of committees, when you sit on these committees and you work them, it's extraordinary what talents people bring. And most people have got some talent to bring to it. And I think probably, are we under Chatham House rules?
Well, we're broadcasting to Periscope.
Well,
so, yes.
Certainly yes, we are.
Nobody's a gossip here, are they? You know, apart from Natalie, but everybody else is.
What's really interesting, I don't know, other people in the room may find this as well, one of the interesting things about House of Lords is these are sort of people who are largely successful, largely who've done things. One of the great sort of sharing characteristics is everybody's insecurity. You know, always people thinking the next thing, are we doing this right? And you know, I think it's a very nice thing. People never take much for granted. It's always, you know, are we doing the right thing? Are we trying? You always get miscreants who actually do the wrong thing. But one of the great characteristics you can always sort of discuss with somebody is imposter syndrome. And if I were to say to Roy, it's all been a bit of a mistake now. Actually, you've really got to go back to a sink estate in Middlesbrough because you were swapped over at birth. And people say, do you think that? And I say, yeah, of course, you know, everybody thinks it, don't they? They say, my goodness, I worry about that all the time. So, you know, it's quite interesting, isn't it, when you start to poke around in people's lives. So, you know, more modesty than you think.
Well, let's have a poke around in your lives, because you were Brentwood School, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
And we nearly share a birthday, don't we?
But inevitably you're younger, otherwise you'd have raised it.
I'm 4 months younger, which you can tell.
So that's what healthy living does, doesn't it? Look at us. And a short haircut.
Yeah, I'm rather pissed off that he's got the hair and I haven't, but there you go. So, Brentwood School, and then you went to uni in Durham.
Yeah.
Why Durham?
It didn't need Latin to get in.
Yeah. And you studied economics, I think.
Yeah, economics, yeah. Which I was grateful for, really. And when I got a job, I thought, you know, everybody who studies something like economics thinks they know how to fix the world. And I went to work in a bank, and they sent me to the credit department where I had to operate an adding machine with a handle. And you know, it's quite a good. I think you call it an induction now, but it was really miserable.
Yeah. So what was your family background? Because in those days, going to university wasn't as easy as it is now, is it? I mean, everyone goes to university now.
I was thinking this the other day that, you know, I was born in 1946. I'm the beneficiary of the great post-war free health, direct grant school, free higher education, apart from a bit of money my parents had to find. It, you know, nobody had it better. I sometimes think we have not paid back very well for all the free things we had. So yeah, that was it really. Grew up in Brentwood, 30 miles out of London.
And then you went and joined.
Even more.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
What's happened to the mics? We've paid for these mics.
No.
Come on.
Exactly. I don't know why.
Perhaps if you hold them there.
No,
it's horrible. That's
It's
vile.
actually
You see, never we got technology providers in the room, is it?
It's IMS Maxims
Come on.
all over again. Right. Oh, and the blondes arrived, ladies and gentlemen. Big round of applause for the blondes. Blondes
Well,
arrived.
just give us a wave if we're not doing well enough out there, will you? And we'll get the volume
I'm
up.
really sorry about that. It's the.
Let's get going.
Okay, right. I blame. Sorry? This guy got a big goal. You can hear me. What? Yeah, you could hear me from anywhere. There you go. I've completely lost my thread now.
Well,
oh yes, the House of Lords. No, not that. I know exactly what. The bank. What happened? Because then, I mean, you really, I mean, your business, your background is in business, isn't it? In companies.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I've done is, by and large, invested in built and sold businesses all my life, and that's it.
Yes.
So I've been in, I think we call it environmental engineering. I've been in insurance. I'm still in insurance. I was in long-term care. I owned a scanner company. I was in long-term care. There was a golden age in long-term care. I'll tell you that. When you were pricing against local authority providers and the NHS in its old form. And that was the gap. And of course, if anybody was wise, you know that government is slow, but it grinds you in the end. Whether you're a supplier or you work for it, both things happen. And it's an interesting observation. And all these things are cyclical. It's a very interesting state, the long-term care business, or anybody who actually supplies things like that to the NHS.
You was Westminster Healthcare.
Yep.
Are you still involved?
No, I sold that a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I have been invested in a psych and drug rehab business, which we sold to the Priory about a year ago. Schizophrenia care I've been invested in. So I'm sort of out there, actively involved in that stuff.
But the future of health care home type care, is really very precarious, isn't it? I mean, we hear of places closing down very frequently now. I think it was Care UK saying they're really treading their margins. They've had their somebody else had their debts downgraded by Moody's. I mean, it's a dodgy time.
And I think a dangerous time from the acute sector's point of view. I mean, we'll probably come to the report, but one of the key things in it is if we don't fix detox, actually the whole of the acute system will grind to a halt. And the way to fix detox is to have some sort of step-down care at a fair price. Now, what is a fair price? I remember a long time ago when I was in the long-term care business going to see the Secretary of State of the day with a group of other providers, and we were as usual, campaigning there wasn't enough money. And he held his hand up and he turned to his aide and he gave me this cutting. And it said, "Care home are killed when handbrake on Rolls-Royce fails and rolls over him." Now, it's a question of where the balance of fairness lies in these things. And those of you who've ever been involved in government financing will know the concept of sawtooth. The costs go up like this, they see them going up. The only thing they can do is whack it hard, it goes down, people nearly go bust, they refinance it again, it goes up. And it's a highly cyclical business. We could get on a plane and go to North America today. Great, same sort of pressure in long-term care in North America. Absolutely the same pressure. And so the big question is going to be, how do we actually get a fair price to sustain that sector, where people don't make supernormal profits, and we had a phase of that, where people actually, the margins were too great, and also aggressive financing sort of became overly important. It was how you financed it was more important than how you operated it. Now, I think CQC and all those things, we're getting it in the right place, but clearly there is a funding issue, which I know people in the department are thinking very hard about. Because, as I repeat, if we don't get that right, if you think about what happened in Cambridge, is there anybody here from Cambridge, Adam Brooks? Okay. Would I be correct in saying that the CQC shut a large provider in the town, a large nursing home at one point, I believe? And I think Adam Brooks had quite a detox problem built up on the back of it. What happens when you don't do that? You don't do elective care. And when you don't do elective care, you don't get revenue. When you don't get revenue, you get a deficit. And then you get help from the middle. None of us want that. So, I mean, that's what we've got to fix.
Yeah. And you looked at, let's talk about pathology, because you looked at that, didn't you? Was that one of the first reports you did for the health service?
In health, yeah.
Yeah. And what's happened to that report?
Well, I mean, I'd say until last year, a complete waste of time. Just to just give you the numbers, I think pathology costs about $3 billion a year across England only. And we thought certainly you could probably take just over 10% out, 350 million, by more cooperation, better buying of things, the usual stuff. In the course of that review, I'll share an anecdote. I went to a very big teaching hospital and it had the best analyzer line I'd ever seen. And the analyzer line was from me to the wall. And I talked to the management. I said, this is fantastic, this is world class. They said, this is one of the best lines in the world. I said, how many hours a day are you running it for? And they said, 6.5 hours. So I said, oh, well, that's good, isn't it? Well done, you know. So a week later, I'm in a hospital 35 miles away. I walk in. My goodness, there's another analyzer, just like that. So I said, how many hours a day are you running that for? They said 7. I said, but I just saw one like that, didn't I, the other day? Oh, they said, no, ours is 3 feet longer. Now, I mean, are we ever going to get smart, or are we just going to keep on going in the old way and limp along from crisis to crisis? Because not only have we got the current funding challenge, but when we get into all the smart drugs for oncology, all those things, if you need 5 different formulations to deal with a tumour, we're going to have to find the money from that from somewhere. And we've got to make sure that what we're doing now is as efficient as it can be, so we get ready for that next big wave of technology, which is going to have a high cost on it.
Don't you? I mean, it seems to me that the breaking of the cycle, where all the trusts think they've got to deliver all the services, and with all, you know, by that I mean not just clinical services, but as you say, the pathology and all the rest of it. There isn't a willingness. I can't see a willingness to. Well, actually, probably that's not right. I mean, if you look at stroke care, for example, in London, I mean, Ruth Carnell did a very good job in that. We now have the cardiac centres and the stroke centres and all the rest of it. But it does take, you know, somebody with heavy boots, really, doesn't it, to push all that through?
I don't know about heavy boots, Roy. I mean, I think that's the question that we've been trying to debate. How do you take these things forward in the NHS? What is the best way to do it? Now, you know, if I were to, you know, the old bookends, one bookend is you let everybody do as they like and hope it works out, and then when it doesn't, you just cut the funding and hope they will cut it and struggle through till the next time. Or the other end, do you actually try and show people what good looks like, and then try and actually take it department by department in every provider, and actually work with them to make sure that they can realise what good looks like in their own hospital?
I want to get on to the report in a minute, but I'd like to explore a bit more of some of the other things you've done, because you do have a very rich experience. You sorted out the Manchester Games. Well, that was an interesting story, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the older members of this audience will remember the Dome in 2000, and for the Labour government the Dome was a disaster. It was one of those vanity projects started by one government, endorsed by another, and it was a bit of a damn squib. And the next thing that appears on the radar are these Commonwealth Games in Manchester for 2001, and I think it became apparent, or around that date, it became apparent that the numbers were wrong. And the Prime Minister Blair in those days, he sort of was, I think, politically worried that they had another one. And for various reasons, I was asked to go and look at it. And I found a gap of £120 million and wrote a note to them saying either you scrap it or you give them £120 million.
I bet they really enjoyed that. Well, they burned a hole in the in-tray.
Well, it did, but you see, what happened was I go to see a junior minister, and this is quite a good example, and he said to me, well, surely it can be 75 million, it's not 120, you see, and I said to him, I was a bit fed up. I said, excuse me, I said, look, I've been working at this for 4 months. I'm not in the business of making up a number. I said, it's not 70, it's not 85, it's not 142, it's 120. In fact, it turned out to be 118 million when it was over. And it was an interesting thing. They found the money. It was a success. But at the same time, I told them to cancel the World Athletic Championships, which were going to be held at Pickett's Lock. Anybody who knows East London. And at Pickett's Lock, you couldn't get there. I mean, it was going to have a world event where you went on a bus, and the railway couldn't carry any more passengers on the train. I mean, it was just... Anyway, all I would say is if they'd gone ahead with the IAAF event at Pickett's Lock, we certainly wouldn't have got the Olympic Games, because we would have screwed up so badly. But we made Manchester work. It gave the government the confidence to bid for the Olympics, because we'd done it once, and then we went on to do the Olympics.
You were on the committee?
I was on, yeah, to bid for it and to make the choices, and it was really interesting. once we'd won it, I mean, the key for that was to get the money right from the beginning, and to not disappoint the public by having an overrun. And I think we said it was going to be 9 billion or whatever it was, and it came in at that number. And I think that's the incredible thing. It's keeping the confidence of politicians and the confidence of the electorate that you can actually do these things and get the numbers right.
And then you bailed out, they called you in again. You're Mr. Fixer, aren't you? He called you in again at Wembley. That went wrong as well, didn't it?
Well, the story, I mean, after I was with that minister that night, and I was pretty pissed off, actually, this. I've spent time, I've wasted my time. Is this, it's lucky you don't know who he is, anyway. And as I was leaving the meeting, this man came up to me and he said, "Are you busy?" And I said, "I'm always busy." He said, "Do you know what's going on at Wembley?" I said, "I don't." He said, "That was quite frank, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yes, it was, but we're all busy." So anyway, I go home, I go to another meeting, and I go home that night, and about 8 o'clock I get in, and I said to my wife, how are things? She said, I know Jack Straw, who was then the Home Secretary. She said, "Jack's been on, and he's got a message from you from the Prime Minister. He says you've got to fix Wembley." So that's how these things happen. So and it was just a nightmare, but we managed to sort of pick our way through it, and we got it built, and we said it'd be built for £735 million, and it was.
And what was wrong with it? Because I mean, so many of these projects go wrong, don't they? Is there a central theme, or is there something that they all do wrong?
It's quite interesting. I think if you look at government, I think my own sense is that on big government stuff, we have very, very clever policymakers. I think we're very good at policy. I think when it comes to execution, it's not very exciting. It requires consistency and actually go back and go back and go back again. And somehow we're not so good at that. We weren't. I think we're getting better. I think the Olympics proved it. I think Terminal 5 proved it. But historically, we weren't very good at that. And I think I look back at a number of government projects where you have very bright civil servants, senior civil service, grade 5s, whatever they're called, and above, and they suddenly send the whole thing to Sheffield to be run. They've done it, they've thought it out, and then they're surprised it goes wrong. So I think it's that attention to detail, and actually also just seeing it through.
How long do you think it'll be before you're called in to do the high-speed railway?
Oh, I don't know. As you said, Roy, you get to a certain age. I think there's a limit to what you can do.
Go on, you'd love to sort that out.
No, I don't. I say, look, they can't even agree the route of it yet.
No.
So I don't think that's.
Don't you think the whole idea of getting to Birmingham 20 minutes quicker, isn't that real value for money?
Absolutely.
Getting out of it 20
Getting
minutes.
out of Birmingham. Yeah. And then you sorted out legal aid, and you stopped all these poor people having proper defences.
No, that's not true. That was Michael Gove later.
He's my local MP.
Oh, well, there we are. You take it up with him. No, I mean, that was just a simple thing, that the budgets were getting out of control in legal aid, and we were spending, I think, £2.5 billion a year, rising by 15% a year. And the issue was, could we reconfigure it? Could we do things? And there were certain cases called high-cost cases where some barristers were making £1 million out of representing, actually, essentially defending somebody on legal aid. That didn't seem fair, and trying to find ways of actually boxing that out was quite important. The second thing was a lot of legal aid practitioners were actually coming up to their 60s and into their 60s, and the cohort of people who were doing it were actually declining, and also many of them had their practices based on having managed to buy a house in the 1960s and actually weren't very well organised, a lot of single-handed practitioners, rather like in some cases GPs. And the way we approached it was to try and trade volume for price. So we saw a model where more people came together to become more efficient, and the government could buy it at a lower price. And actually people accepted that. And then Grayling came along as Secretary of State then and tried to take it further than the system would go, and of course it started to break. And cuts are always, look, you're all in things that make these decisions. You're always trying to balance how far you can take it before you damage it. And that's the judgment call we all have to make every day. How far can we push it? How quickly can we push it? You know.
That's interesting because where we are tonight in the King's Fund, they've got a report coming out tomorrow. It's embargoed till midnight, but it says some pretty unflattering things about NHS funding and the consequences that that's having on the quality of care. And one wonders really if the NHS has been pushed to its limit.
I mean, I think I look around, there are more practitioners in the room who would know that. All I can say is that some people are doing it. I mean, let me go back. To me, there are only two issues in healthcare, which are quality and value. And surprisingly, they go hand in hand. Those people who deliver high quality actually mostly seem to have their costs well controlled. And the people who are delivering bad care seem to be all over the place on the money. So, you know, there's something in management. I think the question I'd like to take advice from the audience on later on when we come to it is, are we prepared to accept that we shouldn't ask those hospitals who aren't using their resources well, should we not ask them to do better? And should we not point to where they're not using those resources well and have a reasonable debate? What have we called this? What's this called? A chat?
Health chat.
Yeah, I think, can you have a health chat with those providers to actually understand why they're not addressing those issues when many of their colleagues are? And the great thing about the NHS is we're doing most things right somewhere. We don't need to get on an aeroplane and go to North America or go to Germany or go to Japan, anywhere else. We do know how to do it. What we've singularly failed to do is share how to do it at scale across the system.
It's like that Morecambe and Wise thing with Andre Prevenant, isn't it? We're playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order.
Yeah, and I think the danger of the current funding squeeze is people will lose their nerve. And the most important thing we can do is help people keep their nerve and show them what to do.
Trust chief executives are already saying to me privately that they can't do it.
Well, this is, since it is Chatham House rules, I do think, also when I talk to chief executives, I do suggest sometimes we're getting kitchen sinking. And there's never been a better time to clean house, and if you're going to lose money, do it now and clean it out. You know, and we've had that. And I think, interestingly enough, this is the year where it's going to be quite interesting to watch. And the interesting thing, and we'll come to the report, the interesting thing about the line-by-line analysis is there isn't anywhere to hide on that. We start to see where, you know, where people are managing to squirrel it away or, you know, sort of bunk it off now. So I think the question is, the real question is, this year we need to determine what reality is. You know, inevitably you get the bleeding stumps, don't you? I mean, we cry about it, we did enough. So what we've got to do this year is reach a consensus among ourselves about what good looks like and how we advance to it. And then you've got a delta. And then the government will have to decide how it funds that. It can do it one of two ways. It can deny care, push out the waiting lists, or it can do anything it likes, or it can find some money, or between us, we can somewhere get in the middle to prove to those who fund that we're using every pound we get our hands on to the best of our advantage. And I'm not talking about system change here. You know, the great myth that we can redesign it again. You know, there's so much to be got if we run our hospitals and our community services and our mental health trusts if we run them well. And we know how to run them well. We don't all know how to run them well.
Let's come to the report, because that's what we're all interested in tonight. How did it come about? How did you end up doing it? Because somebody said somewhere or other you were going to save $5 billion. Did you say that, or where did that come
No,
from?
absolutely, no, absolutely. At minimum.
A minimum of 5%. It's worse than I thought. Right.
Well, only because somebody said the other day the number's been back traded to 3, and since nobody had told me that, I was surprised. So anyway, this is how it came about. Richard Douglas.
We won't all know who Richard Douglas is.
So, you know, former finance director of Department of Health, very fine man, very experienced, and now on the board of NHSI.
That's not Monitor, for those who...
No, it is certainly not Monitor.
We call it NHSI, not Monitor. Just to piss Ed Smith off, we call it not Monitor.
Have you been on a customer awareness course?
Yes. I failed.
No, all it happened, actually it's quite funny really. Richard Douglas said, would I have a look at procurement? And I said no. He said, why not? I said, because you can look at procurement unless you actually work out how to get the whole system to adopt it. You'll have another report which will, gain you a bit of time for a moment or two, but it'll turn onto a dusty document on a shelf in Whitehall.
Well, that's what you and I have in common, isn't it? Because we laughed about this when we met. Because years ago, I see Eve Richardson's here, the chief executive I used to work with, and I was chairman of Homewood. While I was at Homewood, when was that, 1992 or something like that, I wrote a report for the... I was the chairman of the Standing Committee on Supplies and Purchasing.
Yeah.
We had a budget of about, I don't know, 3 billion or so. It wasn't very much in those days. And it was a complete balls up, it really was. And so when I ran it was a balls up, and I'm pleased to say it's still a balls up, really. But we wrote a report on how we should do stuff better and how we should procure stuff better and all the rest of it. It sort of mirrors everything after the report that has been a National Audit Office, all the rest of it. And you are right. I mean, the only person that made any money out of that was the shelf maker.
Yeah,
because it's stuck on a
Yeah,
shelf.
that's it. And so, I mean, it's interesting, it's right. Somebody said to me the other day, we're going through implementation of some of the work we've done. And somebody in Trust said to me, he said, I've worked on 14 strategies. He said, this is the first one I've ever worked to implement. And that there it is, that's it in an issue. So Richard said, I said, no, I won't do that. And he said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, let's just have a look at efficiency across the board. And the big issue was labour productivity.
Right. I want to stop you there.
Yeah.
I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Because you were the chairman of McKeeson's,
Yeah.
weren't you? So you have a huge experience of global healthcare systems, which must have fed into some of your thinking there.
Well,
Where do you think we sit?
what, as a system worldwide?
Yes.
Well, I think, we all know the Commonwealth Fund data. The Commonwealth Fund would say we have, well, it depends what your criteria are, but the Commonwealth Fund would say we have one of the best systems if you measure it on access, outcomes and value. And for 7.1% of GDP, or whatever the number is, actually it's a cracking good buy. Those of you who've been in the United States, 16, 17% of GDP, Germany 12% of GDP, outcomes not that much better, patient experience better, but the outcomes, I don't think that much better. So I think my own sense is, I think it's what makes me so frustrated. We potentially have the best system in the world if we could get our act together. Now, let me give you the pluses and let me give you the minuses. So on the pluses, our hospitals run full. They run too hot sometimes. 88% full. Now, we go to the United States, they're in clover if they're running at 63. And then remember, they don't get paid for 5% of the care because people walk into the emergency departments and have to be treated and not reimbursed. So we have a fantastic advantage, number one, of massive fixed cost recovery. But then you look at it and you think, maybe that's the case of the building, and then you look at the scanners and you say to yourself, okay, so we've got a big fat MRI machine here, and then you go into an American hospital and they're knocking through 5 an hour, and we're knocking through 15 a day. And then you start to ask yourself the question, is that right? What should we be doing? So I think the point to answer your question is, we could be the best, and we could create a major export product out of this. Because if you look at emerging economies, I spend quite a lot of time in China, if you look at all those emerging economies, what people want is mass access to decent health care at the lowest price. They don't want the American system. They don't want the German system. They don't want the French system. If we could just get our hospitals and our system running right, and I'll come to integrated care at some point, Roy, I'm sure we will. We all like a laugh. But the point I'm making is, the point I'm making is that we have been episodic in how we've managed the NHS. We dive in, we dive out, we have initiatives, we have all those things. What I'm arguing for is a consistent approach, as people like the Americans have. They're good at managing it. They've got an awful system, as are the Germans, highly systematic about it. And we lack that systematization because we're still, I think, in many ways, working on a more artisan model in an industrial age. So the answer is, it's okay, it's not good enough, it could be really good.
Well, we had Mark Bricknell as our guest one evening. He was interesting because he travels the world looking at healthcare systems. He said more or less the same thing, if we just get our act together. So, I mean, I read the report and reviewed it, and it reads to me like almost like an operations manual for a hospital. And when I read it, I was thinking, you know, is this too detailed? Wouldn't it have been easier, for example, if you look at procurement, there are two approaches to this, aren't there? One, you could say to people, right, your non-pay spend is X percent of your turnover. Let's call it 20%, just to take a figure. So your non-pay spend is 20% of your turnover. Next year it's got to be 18%. The year after it's got to be 15%. So you just say to the board, we're going to clamp down on your non-pay spend. How you do it is up to you. Whereas your approach, perfectly legitimate, is to say we want to reduce your non-pay spend, but we want to be very involved in how you do it. You're going to send 20 reports a month up. We're going to drive you all balmy with data, and we're not here to help you.
I
Discuss.
mean, okay, I think you capture the dilemma. So look, if we were starting from scratch again, you would go and look at how big hospital chains around the world work. And they have central procurement, electronic catalogues, no local discretion, unless you want to do about 92 keystrokes to get around the catalogue. Totally centralised. They have highly professional buying teams who take the cost out, and we all agree that we're going to use the same hip joint, don't we? Okay? So that's as cheap as you get it. The other hand, we have, as a result of our constitutional changes to health, we have freestanding NHS trusts, we have foundation trusts, we have people who are given a high degree of autonomy. Now, you can't actually go along to them and say, you're all now going into Procurement 101 centrally. It just isn't it'd be highly desirable. You know, if you ended up as the health Gauleiter of England, which you could, you know, you could actually say to people, as from the 1st of March 2017, you're all in one system, you key it in and you do it. But it isn't like that out there. So what we have to do...
But didn't you have the opportunity to make it like that? Is the report a missed opportunity? Couldn't you have said, we are not going to really cut into our non-pay spend, our procurement costs, unless there is a much higher degree of centralisation?
Well, I think if you read it, I'm saying that, but I'm being thoughtful about it. No, sorry, forgive me, Ryan.
I'm the only one in the room that's read it, apart from you.
No.
Let's have who's read the Carter report, and I will be oh shit, okay. I didn't expect that. What's on page 47? Where's the spelling mistake on page 28? Yeah.
Look, here's the point. All these things about what you can achieve in a reasonable period and carry people with you. Now, the NHS...
But, sorry to interrupt again, but I mean, it just seems to me that the NHS is kind of aching for someone to do that.
I think in the end we'll have to get to something like it. But let me answer your question,
sorry,
because I think this is really important. What you have, if you said to every hospital, take the first proposition you've made, if you said every hospital, take 3% off your non-pay, okay, they would just go hacking around at everything, okay? What we're saying is there are very clear categories where we could take a lot of money out. Now, hips is a very good example, okay? We're seeing hip joints costing anything from £800 to £1,500, all right? A huge range. Why is that range like it?
I'll tell you.
Yeah, tell me.
Because when I wrote my report, my report is bigger than your report. Now, when I wrote my report, I got buttonholed by some surgeons, right? Because I said the same thing. Why we got so many different hip joints? And where's Mike? Mike will understand what I'm going to say. He knows exactly what I'm going to say. And this guy said to me, he's retired now, but he said to me, have you ever seen a hip operation? And I said, no. He said, well, come and I'll show you. So I went into the theatre. It is the most awful experience. I mean, the patient is treated like a lump of meat. Their legs are shoved in the air. They're bashed and walloped about, the bones are cut and the things are bad, and they've wrestled it in to get the alignment right. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to be sick. Please don't let me faint. I should look like a pillock, you know. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, you're very interesting enough. And there's the smell of barbecued meat, and it's just awful. The whole process is awful. Then he sews it all up again, and then we go and have a cup of coffee. He said, what do you think of that? And I said, wow, it's just a wonderful experience to see it work. He said, look, he said, I can do that. He said, because I use that hip. I was trained on that hip. I'm comfortable with that hip. My revision rate is much lower than the national average. I am comfortable with that. Now, if fine, I will use another hip, but I'm going to put it in your hip first.
Oh, there you are. So that epitomises it. No, well, I mean, I think the orthopaedic profession should hire you as their spokesman. That was but oh well, okay. There
you help me.
Okay, now I think you've answered the question, because look, if you go for the model which is draconian and says you do it, it's never going to work. I mean, these people are professional, respected practitioners. Now the question is, how do you gradually shift it across? And what's really interesting, 2 points to that. I could take you to hospitals where in the week the orthopaedic surgeon uses joint A. He makes the same argument, right? Very elegant, he's always done it, productivities. Come the weekend, he's down at Spire, right? And Spire say, you've got to use the 10-pound joint, and he knocks through 6 in the morning. Now, how do you manage that, Roy?
With difficulty.
Yeah, right, okay.
So, see my argument going up in the
no, well, it's, as ever, it's difficult. So what we've gradually seen is exposing people to information. In a modern society, we're an information society, and this is what it's all about, and thanks IMS Maxims, that's your plug. It's an information society. And what we have found, and we have gone, you've got Tim Evans, we've got Tim Briggs. Tim Briggs work on orthopaedics. You go and sit down in a hospital and you go through the consultant's performance, you look at the revision rates, you look at the joints they're using, you look at the outcomes. And most people, in my experience, respond to data. Most people do not want to be a klutz. They want to actually do their job well, and they want to interact. So over time, you do it. And have any of you been to the famous Virginia Mason Hospital, beloved of the Secretary of State? There we are. There we are. Now, in Virginia Mason, if they go and hire an orthopaedic surgeon, they only hire him on the basis he practices in the Virginia Mason way. So from day one, even if he's been using Stryker somewhere else, he actually can come and use, because if you work in Virginia Mason, you use whatever it is. So so gradually you switch people across to actually becoming more effective. And I think in a respectful society, in a very respectful NHS, it's about how we share that information, but then check it and gradually come together to deal with the vendors. Now, there are no vendors in here, are there? Okay, right. We looked at this. This is really interesting. Where they're brilliant is coding. So if you go to the device manufacturers, so for Taunton, let's take a defibrillator, good example. Taunton would have code 16, 24, 10, 12, and it would be priced at £100. You're now Guildford, and the same defibrillator is now coded at 16, 4, 2, 10, 8, and it's priced at £120. It's the same defibrillator, okay? But because they want to actually tell everybody they're getting the best price, we've never standardised it. You go into the German hospital chains, you get none of that rubbish. This is the spec we buy on, you deliver it to that spec. And by the way, keep your salesman out, because we don't want to pay the price of it. So how do we get to that is the prize. And I think where we're starting
You travelled around a lot,
Yeah.
didn't you, while you were doing it? You went to 170 hospitals?
No, only 45.
Only 45, right. Did you go to Manchester?
Yeah, of course.
They've got a really good electronic catalogue there.
They have.
Simon Weston, is
Yeah,
it?
Manchester, he's great.
Yeah.
And so, back to my point, we know how to do it.
So why don't we just copy his catalogue?
Because we don't have the power to tell people to do it. Now, and that's the truth. We don't have the
We've
power.
got the power when we want the power. We've got the power to tell them to open 7 days a week.
Yes, we have the power to do that. But interestingly enough, and this is where I think may I talk about how we see this going forward?
Yes, please do. Yeah, because
So-
we're all mystified. The HSJ says you've been parked.
Well, I think that's true. Until yesterday,
What happened yesterday?
we agreed how we do it.
Ah,
Because
you
we know
heard
I
it
was
here.
coming tonight. I thought I can't get ambushed by Roy Lilley, so I've got to get a move on. So.
Do you know, that's just completely buggered up my second line of thinking. 7:45, I'm knackered now. Take it away.
You've got to go to Telford, haven't
Yeah,
you?
I have. Yeah.
So, I mean, the point is this. The issue is, how do you take this work forward and how do you interact with the trusts? And so what we've really done and what we're building this program is to have very detailed information on a line-by-line basis across the main specialties. You know, T&O, how all those things, how the cardiac departments work, what does good look like? And the reason we came to the good look like question, because I was in a big teaching hospital discussing radiology, and the radiology data was awful. I mean, the productivity was absolutely pathetic. And the chief exec I know quite well said to me, he said, "Come on, is it really that bad?" And I said, "It is. And it's your data. I haven't made it up." And then he looked at me and he said, "Well, you're a bit of a smart ass, aren't you?" He said, "What does good look like then? What should I be doing?" And that's when you get to how fast you should run your scanners and how fast you run your labs and what you should expect out of your clinician productivity and what a good rota looks like and who should turn up when. That's what it's about. And so what we're trying to do, and some hospitals are doing it, what we're trying to do is have a series of dialogues, because all hospitals are different, but there are certain basic laws of big data which do show us we've got more information than probably anybody's ever had in a good place. Rotas is a very good example. We know what good looks like on a ward. And we know when people are specialing too much or there's weak management and all those things. All I would report is every time we've had a dialogue about this on a line-by-line basis with chief executives, people have recognised it or they've objected, but at least we've agreed what good look would start to look like in their case. So on procurement, we thought a much better thing was to begin to establish two things, which was a specification for products, so we didn't get out-coded by the vendors. These are highly sophisticated, mostly American companies. I've got nothing against American companies, but they've had 40 years of people trying to buy smart, and they're smarter. And we here are the National Health Service, who managed to behave like a bunch of little shops when we're faced with a multinational giant dealing with us. And I always share that Benjamin Franklin, when he went to sign the Declaration of Independence, he turned to the bloke next to him and he said, "If we don't all hang together now, they'll hang us separately." And what the vendors have done to us is they've hung us separately. There's not one hospital I have been in where they have not told me they have the best price. And not one hospital has had the best, but one has. And they didn't know it. They were sublimely happy in their ignorance.
So just explain to me what this now looks like. So you will collect the data from every trust on everything they're buying.
Yeah. No, gradually rising. So you start with the first 100 things.
Yeah, okay, so incrementally over a period.
Yeah.
That goes into some massive
Yeah,
database
yeah.
somewhere or other. And then do you benchmark it blind, or do you do you do league tables? How are you going to do it?
You're going to push it back and say to people, these are the best prices we're seeing. And that's all you need to do. Do you know, it isn't, and I'll tell you what people keep missing, it's not price, it's quantity as well as price. So when we started this, all these people, with these database people on prices, all came to us and said, "Give us a few bob, we will save you billions because we can show where the best prices are, and all you need to do is get on that buying pattern and all the money will drop out automatically." But of course, they couldn't do it. What was really important, nobody knew the volumes. And where we did drill down, and we had hospitals where people were getting crackerjack deals on the famous rubber glove, we then found that all the staff were putting 2 pairs on. Because they didn't believe it.
Yeah.
So, you can't just pull one piece out. So what you need to do is to get the data, sit down in a meeting where the chief exec's there, not the procurement person who says, "Do you know, I can buy this pen cheaper than anybody else," overlooking the fact he's had to buy a container of them and they get dumped on the loading dock, as opposed to something which comes in a tote and goes to a ward. And that's why you need a specification. It's so unprofessional compared with our global competition.
Let's have a look at staffing, because you're looking at that as well, as safe wards, safe staffing. Okay, I mean, to set the scene for this, we had Robert Francis, who frightened everybody to death, and he sat in that chair, and he was a very interesting guest as well. And he said it's all down to the staffing. Then there was a scramble to get staff, a very bad time because a lot of the staffing places have been cut because of the austerity programme. We then started to get agencies in. Everybody wanted to know what safe staffing looked like. NICE produced the most ludicrous piece of guidance I think I've ever seen, that 1 to 8, and if anything goes wrong, wave a red flag on a Sunday afternoon, and all of that nonsense. They've abandoned that now. Chief nurse seems to have walked away from the numbers, and the trusts have been told to get on with it. We've gone round in a circle on safe staffing, and here you are on page 26.
23.
Sorry. You want to show us your graph?
All right. So, nurses and non-qualified, about 20 billion, okay, across the system. So it's our biggest resource, it's our resource which is under the greatest strain. I totally agree, because we didn't get training right in 10. So, there's certainly a macro culpability in not doing that. And I think we're going to be regretting that for some years. When you look at the then NICE guidelines, they were, I believe, produced in response to Francis. When we asked NICE how they'd arrived at the guidelines, it was a very slow conversation. We asked
It was
them,
based on a girl's work called Russell, and it was one piece of work that they cited, because I read it, and it took me ages to find the original work. And she didn't say 1 in 8, she said not less than 1 in 8. If it is, it gets dangerous.
and they said the same. A piece of NAO work from 2003.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And another piece of work which showed that if the skill mix altered in some way, the certainly mortality rates changed. Very tenuous. We asked them, perhaps they could explain why these regulatory regimes, the state of California, New South Wales, New Zealand, why they had staffing levels which were significantly lower.
And prescribed in law.
And prescribed in law.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, in Western Australia, by law, you have to report your staffing level by ward every day. So, just consider that for a minute. So we started to, look at this and look at best practice around the world. And what we were keen to understand was the appropriate level of nursing for the patient and the level of care the patient needed. But first of that, we collected in February last year, we collected the data from 1,000 wards across our participating hospitals. And what we did, we asked people just to take it day by day, record the shifts, and then relate that to the number of patients, and we came out to care hours a patient a day.
Did that in any way record the acuity of the patients?
No, but we'll come to that as the second piece of it. So, but we got a crude set of things. Well, the first thing, and I do wish people could see this slide, but I will describe it. This is a ward in a hospital, big hospital, and you can't see, but basically it's a month. It's February. Number of things. Staff drops at the weekend, always. Every weekend, staff drops. Most weekends, agency is called in. What a surprise. But I'd expected that. What I had not expected was on the other days, most of the time, it was above the level of staff that was required. It was above the regulator's level of staff. And then we started to drill down and ask why. And what we found was, as we know, nurses are paid for 37.5 hours a week. Most people are working 6 or 12 or 8s. So let's say we got the simple 3 12s knocking through in a month. You've got 36 hours. So you've got an hour and a half. You've got to get back in some way. Many people weren't getting those hours and a halves, rolling them forward, so they're drifting off the rotas. But much worse than that, what we found was people who had not staffed the shifts properly, went to the sisters and said, I've got to get my hours. I've got to get my hours back. And we have an epidemic of specialing. Patients being said they need more care coming. And it's back to then your question, then what is the appropriate level of care? So then you go to other places in the world who've tackled it. And what most countries do now, most sophisticated systems, they have a very clear baseline hours of care per patient day, and it varies by ward. You're going to have, you know, you're going to have on a T&O ward, you're going to have something totally different to, you know, an ordinary med-surg ward or whatever you're going to have. You know what it roughly should be. And you have the baseline number, and then basically most systems have 4 levels of acuity. And most people have got a little electronic system in their roster. I'll come back to electronic rosters in a minute. They have something, and it works it out, and it says you need these number of people. But this is unacceptable. And I'll tell you the worst thing on this. February 2015, half-term occurred. Half-term occurred, right? 35% of the qualifieds all went that half-term. I thought we were meant to serve patients.
So Rotary?
Well, let me tell you, and I'll tell you, this is such a wonderful thing about the NHS. Of the 136 acute providers in England, we think about 110 have bought a roster system. Also, we think 4 are using them properly. I see a lot of nodding. So time and time again, we do it, but we don't do it right. Those hospitals running it right, I've got it absolutely tight as a drum. You've got Rota Central, so you haven't got a very well-meaning sister trying to make it work out there. You've got somebody who holds it together in the middle, really runs it. And one of our cohort of hospitals, with our help, went through all this, said to have a shortage. They turned up with 27 nurses more than they needed, because they were using what they got. They got sickness under control. You know, some people drifting out, 5% sickness, 6% sickness. It's worse in the community. Just managing that stuff back, getting people turning up at the right time. And I went to a hospital early on in this, and I went in, and fortunately the management has since changed. And we got over the sort of tea, biscuits, and how your children bit. And I said to him, I wonder if in a minute, I'd like to go to A&E, and could we get the rota? Because I'd like to walk down, and I'd like to see the people doing A&E today. He said, that's interesting. He said, I'll think about that. And he asked his secretary, and she didn't know. So they got the chief nurse, and she hadn't got it. And an hour later, the rota appeared. Right? Now, the rota went like this, across the month, see? So I said, well, that's really interesting. So do we have to have more people on a Saturday night, you know? It's not Liverpool, but, you know, we might staff up because we have a few fights and we've got to hose the place down and, you know, and we've got to deal with local conditions. She said, no, I don't think it's that at all. No, I don't know. So she looked at it again and she went through the rota. And I wasn't going to let it go. I said, look, I've trundled all the way out here. I'd really like an answer. She said, you know, I think it's how the staff like working. Now, of course we're a respectful employer and we're respectful about patients' needs because that's, you know, staff needs. Of course we've got to be, we're modern. But there is a balance in all this. And we need to get the data and we need to expose it to senior management who aren't asleep at the job. And one thing's very interesting, in the course of this we sought information about what chief executives in leading healthcare systems looked at every day. What was the first thing when they walk in the morning they want to know? In the English hospitals, it's usually whatever the latest Department of Health thing is. Is it RTT? Is it infection rates? Is it, you know, you've been through it, you know what it is. In France, where the local mayor is always the chairman of the hospital, which has advantages and disadvantages, one of them being that if you look at the electoral cycle in France, French hospitals always higher up in the 6 months ahead of election. I mean, totally politicised, as a general rule. But their main concerns are about staff and things like that. You go to the German hospitals, the American hospitals, and what they want to know is how many people do I have in my hospital today? How many should I have got out? And I can't get out. how many hours of care did my nursing staff provide, and did my theatre start on time? And that's what they look at every day. When you go back to your hospitals, ask what people look at.
I mean, that all, we'll get on to some questions in a minute, but that all says to me, this is really about management, isn't it? I mean, this is everything that you've said, everything in your report, to anyone who's ever run a business. This is, I'm not being discourteous about the report, but I mean, this is not rocket science. This is how you run a business. And so what does it say about NHS management, and what is there to do about it? Because it's getting harder and harder to run trusts. What is it, 12% of hospitals now don't have a chief executive because no one wants the job. I mean, in my day, everybody wanted to be the chief executive. It was the pinnacle of a career. Now people walk away from it. We get very experienced people who are in senior middle management roles who just won't take on the role of being a chief executive. We've made it too tough.
I think that's true. And, I mean, we do have a blame culture, and but on the other hand, I'd say against that, we do have some extremely well-run hospitals. I mean, this is not an NHS systemic failure, okay?
But they all share something. The ones that are good, Fenwick, Northumberland, Frimley Park, all of them have had chief executives, have had their feet under the table for a long time.
Absolutely. And what we haven't done, we've put people in appropriate jobs. And when they get into those jobs, the data available to them to make those decisions is not particularly well formatted. You walk into a troubled hospital, unless you know you have data to show you that your T&O department isn't running right, or your pharmacy is substandard, or your radiology is the wrong price, it's a hell of a job. And frankly, even if you go and hire Price Waterhouse, they don't find it either quickly enough. You know, what did we spend last year? 650 million on consultants.
Yeah, we won't this year. Sorry if anybody's listening. So what do we do about senior management?
Well, I think we.
Sorry, just to give you more food for your argument, for your reply. I mean, now we've got 5 hospitals that are being run by chief executives that are running more than one hospital. Is that the future?
I think clearly there are a number of people who think that chains are the way forward. And you can look at that, and we've had mixed experience, have we not? On the plus side, I would say David Sloman at the Free has gone about it systematically with Barnet and Chase Farm, got a plan, got capable management, stuck to it. I think Frimley Park, with a few wobbles around Heatherwood and Wexham, largely about clinician practice and things like that, are getting on with it. Slowly, being very thoughtful, getting good advice, getting good data, working with clinicians to do it, not forcing things down people's throat, but working very constructively. Conversely, we go to King's and the disastrous mergers down there. So the point about it is, I do believe that we will see increasing numbers of chains. It'll be slow, and one of the keys to running a chain is data. And if you're taking, look at probably the most challenged group of hospitals at the moment in the system is Barts and the London. And Barts and the London was challenged, and then it ups that challenge by taking over Newham, and it takes Whipps Cross. So you have a 1.4 billion hospital system with inadequate data, forcing a merger through that was actually designed to deal with a political problem. So to answer your question, first question, I do believe we'll see chains, and I think you see the beginnings of them now. Competent people, not overstretching. And you think of the wisdom of Jim Mackey in Northumbria when he was under pressure to take Cumbria.
I can't.
Is that all right? Shall I stop?
It's your mum.
So here's the point, that it is actually doing it well and slowly, and I think we will see it, and I think that will help us.
Slowly, there's a key word there,
Slowly.
isn't there? Because, you know,
Slowly.
it's on the hurry up for everything.
I know.
People have to deliver. I mean, I am slightly more optimistic since Ed Smith and the Jim Reaper have taken over at Not Monitor. But there's still an impatience in the system.
Yeah, I think, look, you've got political impatience, you've got financial impatience, and then you've hopefully got some wise people actually saying, let's do it right. And I think I feel myself in that camp. And let's work our way systematically through the hospitals, helping them find out what they can do, sharing the best practice. And, you know, it's boring. You can't go on the Today programme to talk about it. So in a sense, what the system needs to do is to find some things that you can go on the Today programme and talk about, but let all of us get on with trying to make the NHS work. There are different agendas.
Well, we certainly share that agenda with the Academy. Fabulous stuff. I mean, when we started that, we had no idea where it was going. But now, you know, 500,000 page views later, you tell me people don't want to know what good looks like?
They do. And so it's our job to help them find it. But also, not in a didactic way. It's to, what we've done, we've gone along with this data. And, you know, first thing everyone wants to do is argue about the data, isn't it? You know, well, that's 2 years down the drain. So what we said to people, look, it's roughly right. And when it's roughly right, you're still in a bad place. Yeah. So why don't you have a chat about that? Do you know, people say, you know, actually, all right.
They give up the data speaks.
And
Right, who'd like to make a comment or ask a question or say, oh, we're good. Okay, let's start. I'm going to start with the gentleman at the back, and then I'll come to you, sir, with the green shirt. Yes, far away. Would you stand up and give us a, you know, give it a bit of welly?
Sure. My name's Annie Banerjee. I'm an academic and consultant cardiologist here in London. Thank you very much for your comments. What I heard was that if we do it right across the board, the NHS will be the best. Data is really important. Today, two things very importantly happened. Firstly, just a while ago, the news was released that the duty of the doctor's contract has been agreed with them. Secondly, there's been a conference that has come from about celebrating 10 years of the NIHR. And you're talking a lot about data, but you didn't mention research. Both the Francis and Care reports are quite clear that failing hospitals, failing trusts are lacking in research culture. And if you want proper interpretation of data, whether it's inside or outside of the workforce, analysis needs to be done at the workforce as well. So pose that question. Secondly is, how are we going to take our workforce with us in a better way? Because at the moment, that's flagging badly.
Okay, thank you. We got the message. I do object to the word failing trusts. Do 10 press-ups. You're not allowed to say that. These are trusts that need some help. We don't use that language.
Sorry, we've had some comments on Periscope. People couldn't hear that question, so could you just
right.
paraphrase
Yes,
it before we have an answer,
certainly.
please?
The questions that we just had is fundamentally, how are we going to take our workforce with us after the very damaging effects of the junior doctors' strike, and what is the role of research in hospitals who need help? The questioner said they were failing hospitals, but we've taken him out and shot him. Lord Carter.
Okay. Challenged hospitals, shall we say. I think taking the workforce with us is about sharing information. I really do. I mean, I have not been in one hospital where actually you put this up on, I'll deal with rotas, or you say to a medical director, look, we don't quite understand why your consultant bill relative to what you're billing in the HES data is so high. And people have said, go, and they go away and find out. And it leads me to the research point. Because often as not, we have found, where you've got actually low departmental productivity, actually people are engaged in research. And sometimes what we find is the research is not being priced properly. And so one of the questions we need to sort out is the right price for research. I'm with you on research. I mean, that is the future. I mean, how do you get productivity gains without research and going forward and finding better ways to do things? So I think it comes back to sloppy data. And once you clean the data up and you put it in front of people, I'm an absolute firm believer, whether it's workforce or anybody else, people will start to do the right thing. You know, they'll mess about a bit and try and optimize this, but actually fundamentally, good data is it. And training people to use it, whether they're non-executive directors or anybody else, is central to me.
On the effects of the junior doctor strike, I think it's going to take huge active leadership on the part of the trusts where the junior doctors work to sit them down and say, look, your row was with the government, it wasn't with this trust. It's collaterally damaged as the patients who have been backed up on the waiting list. Together we've got to move on. How are we going to do that?
Absolutely. And I'm sure, and again it'll be, you know, some trusts, the well-run trusts, have thought about it, they're doing it, they're getting ready to do it. I think you come back to the management capacity point. You know, there are challenged hospitals, because I don't want to get across him, but there are challenged hospitals, and mostly it's a management issue. And where do we find that management? I think in the next 6 months, 2 years is critical.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Okay, gentleman with the green shirt.
Sam Burrows from a clinical commission group, South East London. You mentioned around the importance of data and translation of that into management information.
Yeah.
That's been available for the best part of 30 years in the NHS and various commissions over the course of that time. But how do you ensure the translation of raw data into actual meaningful management information performance when quite often trusts, clinical commissioning groups, and even the NHS England don't actually make meaningful use of the data available to them?
Okay, I'm just going to repeat the question. I'll just summarise it. It's about turning the data into the management of information by the use of technology and management and so on, to turn it into management decisions, something that's useful to you as a tool to manage. We've been doing it for 30 years badly. How are we going to start doing it right? I'm not sure we have been doing it for 30 years badly.
I think it's episodic again. So, I mean, first of all, my comments are limited to acute providers. So, if I could just to that. There is a lot of data. I mean, if you look at what we were doing, we know what a hospital sells in the crudest terms because they have to bill it. Whoever paid, doesn't matter, you know, specialist commissioning, you, or anybody else. So you can go in the HES data and you can say in your trauma and orthopedics department last year you billed 18 million. Okay? You then can go into the ESR database and you can pull up the consultants. Then if you go to the Bort ledger you can pull out the locums. And you add them together and you start to have that dialogue. And it's simple. I mean, you've made the point. This isn't big data. You know, we could do much more with our data. I mean, I think we might, I was saying this earlier to the IMS people, we have had digital failure. We have not digitised patient records properly. We have not digitised purchasing at all properly, and we have not digitised rosters. We've bought stuff, but we haven't used it. I mean, it's, you know, we are like the famous dog watching television. You know, we can see it, but we never get it. And that's what happens. I'm much simpler. You know, many of you might experience American providers, and I've been in this thing, people with information getting off airplanes and trying to sell you sophisticated answers. Population management systems, all this stuff. And I've got a bit fed up with it, honestly. So what I say to people, you know, you come over here trying to sell me a Ferrari. I haven't even got a road. I need a four-wheel drive truck with some basic information that the people I'm talking to will respect. You know? And when I sit down, if I get a bit of data out, somebody says, I know, I've got 16 consultants working in this space, and I've got 84 nurses, and I'm spending this much on prosthesis, and then I look at the next 5 hospitals, I tell you, you get a very fast debate going. I'd hope to get more sophisticated than that later, and I know people in the commissioning field can do so much more. But for this wave of the effort, I just want to get the hospitals spending the money right.
Right, hang on, I'm going to go to Patrick next, if you don't mind, because Patrick is our sponsor. And so we will listen carefully and give him a nice answer and mention Interserve in the answer.
Yes, Interserve. Interserve.
Thank you.
And we have the same name, which is really good.
Yeah, the other Patrick Carter. So 2 themes I'd like to commentary around. One, you threatened to come back to integration.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear some comments around that. And the other is, there's a lot of talk and some activity around accountable care organisations. Is that the beginning of the end of the commissioner-provider split?
We can only hope so. Patrick asked us about the future of integration and are we likely to see the birth of the accountable care organisations, which are very sensible and a very, very good idea.
Well,
discuss.
Well, I mean, the question is, do we think Manchester is an ACO?
Yes.
I mean, that's it. If Manchester is an
It's a
ACO...
district health authority.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. Well, first of all, we should define what an ACO is. Because many of us, it's like so many things, like integrated care, we all take away from it what we want to, you know, so I think it's interesting. From my own point of view, I do believe that accountable care organisations are the way to go. Because we have so many perverse incentives in the system at the moment that if we go on like that, we are certainly going to be challenged. The relationship, I see people nodding that Manchester is an ACO, but one of the interesting questions I think we're going to find, what's the Manchester healthcare economy? I can't remember. 6 billion, is it? 6 billion, 3 or 4 billion acute providers, 9 acute trusts, a lot of overlap, a lot of stuff, a lot of big personalities, all those things. I think if anybody can do it, Howard Bernstein can, and I go back to the Commonwealth Games because it's him who got the 120 million quid. So he's very good about getting money from central government. So let's bear that in mind. I personally think that we need much more of a guiding hand in the healthcare economy. And the question is the ACO structure right? Well, I think we probably have to get there in the end. And the question has always been, who is the dominating force in any integrated care organisation? And if you go across the world, we've spent thousands of man-years trying not to admit that the acute hospital is the dominant person in the care chain. That's the challenge. If you're prepared to accept that and ACO it and build it around it, and that's what Kaiser does. Yeah. And what you see is so interesting. I remember talking to the people at Kaiser who, in their integrated care model in California, their costs were 100, shall we say, for every patient, because they controlled the primary care, they controlled the acute care, and the discharge, down all the way. The minute they moved to the East Coast, where they had insured patients, they had to buy the care from other people, it was always 110 and north. So, you know, we love Kaiser, don't we? So, you know, no, you don't, but anyway, there we go. But,
yeah.
Because they don't provide population-based health.
Ah, well, that's a different matter. But we can.
Yeah, well, we can do that.
We can.
I wouldn't draw too much from the parallel, but I would just say about I mean, Manchester is like a district health authority, really, and we frown on that thought, because I used to chair a district health authority, and our idea of resource allocation was to take the money we had at the beginning of the year and divide it by 12, and that was how we spent it. You know, we had no way of dealing with the data. It was before Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
You know, it was a nightmare to deal with. Now it's so much more sophisticated that these larger organisations can be run, I think, more sensibly.
If you look, I mean, man, you know, we all know if you concentrate cold elective in one place, everything runs better. Swalek, I mean, we've done it. It's the same old story, we've done it. Now, Manchester, they're getting there with those things, segmenting how we put the work out. I mean, just simple things like blue lights. I mean, you know, if you go, I know, anybody from Essex? Yeah, Essex?
I do hope not.
Chelmsford, Basildon, and Southend. All of them within 20 to 25 minute blue light things. All are running 24-hour NE. Before I came here tonight, I've just been on the telly talking, they're trying to sort something out down in Dorset, and they're moving the hospitals around there, and you can imagine there's like World War III over closing an A&E. Far away.
Angela McFarlane, I'm a director at IMS Health,
Right.
at IMS Maxim, so we have big data, particularly big drug data and real world evidence. I just wanted to build on your kitchen sink philosophy, and obviously the report was very timely. Our latest data on the uptake of biosimilar drugs, so remember these are the drugs that will potentially give headroom for innovation.
Yep.
The anti-TNF drugs at the moment represent 15% of the total medicine spend, full stop.
Yep, right.
Our latest data in March shows that the uptake of infliximab, biosimilar, which has been available for a year now, is 30%. And only 47 trusts are using 50% or more. If you go to your point of share good practice and your fabulous stuff, Roy, you go down to Fraser Cummings, a leading gastroenterologist down in Southampton University Hospitals Trust. He's done a gain share, worked with the CCGs in his area. They're saving £60,000 to £70,000 a month on using the biosimilar. and he describes that as a massive opportunity lost.
So what you're saying is, how do we share best practice?
How do we do that? Because I know Keith Ridge is trying to drive this through the medicines optimisation dashboard, but when we look at our data and we can look at every single hospital and show where they're not doing anything, and by the way, the gastroenterologists are streets ahead of the
Okay,
rheumatologists.
I'll come back to that, 'cause it's very important.
Because I'm at 20 past
No,
7.
sorry.
Yeah.
But can I just answer that? 'Cause I
No,
think
no,
it's-
I want you to, but I just, because Angela
Do you want
would,
to answer it quickly?
is going to go and run through her entire repertoire of drugs.
No, just the biosimilars.
Be all night. Go on, Patrick.
All right. It all comes back to the engagement between people who can pull the data and share it. So how do you do it? Now, if you think back to pre-NHSI, we had Monitor, who was a regulator. Monitor never saw its job to intervene apart from when there was failure. I mean, that was it. It was, you're a regulator, you're right side of the line, you're the wrong side of the line. TDA intervened a bit more, but we never had a means of actually, in a sense, sitting down with trusts on a recurring and continuous basis. So take your point. Where people aren't switching, and Jack and Co know this, right? Where people aren't switching, we would expect the pharmaceutical team to be saying, when you next go to Hospital X, we know they haven't switched. Ask them. And then when we go back 2 months later, they haven't switched, and they've left 50,000 quid on the table. Somebody says, why? And that's all. And I'll give you a great example, which is day case anaesthesia, okay? So we go to some of these hospitals. Now, some of you may know that the cost of a day case anaesthesia is 10 times that of inpatient anaesthesia, right? Sloppiness. Some hospitals gave everybody day case. Jolly nice, you feel a lot better, it's better recovery. It just happens to be 10 times as much. And we go, I'd say it, we go to Salisbury, where she's retired now, she's a great chief pharmacist. A number of times we went there. Every time we went there, she had done what you said. She'd taken 57,000 quid out here. She'd taken £17,000 out there. And that, she just absolutely, that's systematic. She didn't take 1 million. She got 15 here, 70 there. And it's by feeding the data and saying, look, other people are doing this. And in our general management tool, our weighted output unit thing, we've got the high level number, and then we drill down from there.
Eve Richardson.
I'm Eve Richardson. I'm the chair of the Isle of Wight Trust. We're an integrated trust.
Yes,
and the
you
thing
are.
that's challenging...
Accountable care organisation. You've
Well,
got
it
to
will be. It
Yeah.
will be
Yeah.
if we can get our partners to work with us, which I hope we can. But the challenge I've got is, and I like your report, I think it's good, but you talk about hospitals and chains.
Mhm.
We have an ageing population. I like your challenge that health needs to actually control in some shape or form. Care homes and other organisations. When I came into this organisation 6-7 months ago, it was black alert all the time because the trust was being beaten up like virtually every trust in the country is. We need to have health and social care together, responsible for the whole system, because most of those people don't need to be in hospital at all. So I agree with your analysis, but I think it's partial. Because I think it needs to be linked. People live in communities, not in chains.
Can I just add a bit there?
Yeah, I want to take that.
While you're
Yeah,
thinking
take it
about
on the chin. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we're to look at a whole system, we need to sort of cater the whole system, don't we?
Well, I mean, look,
That'd be good.
the chains are partly a response to the management thing, but I think the two issues here. If you said to me, what's an ideal system for this moment, I would say an ACO type system, where somebody takes responsibility for pulling the care together. If I had £1 for every integrated care meeting I'd attended, I'd have significantly more money I've got. I mean, I've wasted so
Can't
much.
have any more.
No. See, no, just
There's
listening.
none left for the rest of
No,
us.
just
Buy
listening
a
to
road.
people go on about it, you know. But in the ideal system, and I'll give a Virginia Mason example. Some of you may have heard me give this. Getting the patient in the right place in the care pathway is critical. So I go to this famous Virginia Mason hospital in Seattle. I have to say paid for by myself, not the government. And I'm walking around with a very nice lady who does T&O, right? She's in charge of T&O. And I said to her, what's your average length of stay for a total hip? And it was the wrong question. She looked really miserable. I thought, oh, this is my visit gone down the can here. She said, it's 56 hours. So it doesn't sound too bad to me. What should it be? She said it should be 52. Right? Now,
Enhanced recovery
yeah,
program.
ours is 128 hours, okay? At average, the length of stay is 5.3 days, I think. If I've done this numbers correct. 5.3 days. Now, to your point, total, the tariff pays for a total hip £5,642, I think, roughly. Roy's probably got it accurately, but anyway, that's it. We all know, mostly these things, if you get through them in the big monies in the first 2 or 3 days, you get them in fast, process them. But the key is, they go to step down. And so, where do you want people? At £1,000 a day? In a very, very expensive setting? Or do you want them in rehab at £200 a day? Or, to the earlier question, do you want them in some sort of convalescent with no intervention? It's just sort of, you know, parking. Getting people in the right place in the care pathway is absolutely critical. The tariff doesn't help you with that at the moment. We've got the wrong structure. So, as part of the wider exercise, we just have to get this right. We have to get the incentives right. But in the meantime,
Yeah, and you're on the board of Monitor, aren't you? You're going to drive.
It's not
this
Monitor
through.
anymore.
Not Monitor. That's right. Sorry.
Is that a trick?
No, I honestly I can't get it in my head what it's actually called, so I just call it Not Monitor.
Yeah, not Monitor.
Blonde, do you have a question?
I haven't got a question. I'd just like to say, Lord Carter, you absolutely have whooped Roy Lilley, because we have never ever trended nationally at #1 on Twitter, and Lord Carter is trending. Roy Lilley has never trended at #1. I just wanted to point that out.
Well done, Blonde.
And unfortunately, we don't have
Great
any
observation,
more time. There's a gentleman in the back in the blue. I'm really pissed off about that. Gentleman with the blue tie. Yes, far away, sir.
Thank you, Chairman of Liaison. We spend a bit of time trying to reduce costs with locums in the NHS. But moving away from that, Roy Lilley, we all know, loves the CQC. Absolutely loves it. If we spent the money on the CQC, to pick up your point, on what good looks like, so spend some time actually looking at the NHS saying what good looks like, would that be a better use of money?
You're talking 200 million here.
Well, what do you think, Roy?
Listen, I'm talking to you. What do I think? Well, I think, okay, I'll give you my answer. It's a fair enough question. I think we started the CQC at a time when we couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
It was Kennedy's report into Bristol. Alan Milburn was the Secretary of State. He had to do something. He reached for the only tool in the box, which was inspection at that time. Peter Homer came in and made a very good fist of setting up an inspectorate. We all know, anyone who's studied management knows that inspection doesn't aid quality at all. If you turn up and inspect it, it's good, you haven't wasted time. Turn up and it's bad, it's too late. So, I mean, it's a whole system approach. But that was all we had at that time. But we've continued on with that. And like a coral reef, the CQC has got bigger and bigger, its budget's got bigger. We've now got the ludicrous situation where we send 200 people in 4 charabancs and put them up in 6 hotels to go and spend 5 days inspecting a hospital to produce a report that comes out 3 months too late. It's a bloody daft thing. If you look at your report, and IMS have got some great dashboard things that they can do now as well. I mean, we can do this stuff electronically now. I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep an eye on how our hospitals are run, but I do think there's a ludicrous sort of weight of manpower with the CQC. When now, today, don't forget, it's 16 years later. You know, if it had worked, we've had 16 years of inspection and we've still got crappy hospitals. If it was going to work, it would have worked by now. But 16 years later, we now have got access to data, we can show people what good looks like, we can compare stuff, and we can encourage them to get better rather than going kicking them for not getting better. That's my view.
Well, and I at the risk of... No, I agree with you, actually, mostly. But to answer the question, I would say it seems to be the next challenge for the CQC, and you can see the response to Francis. I mean, you have to deal with it. You've got to have something out there. I think the question is, how do you construct an inspection and reporting regime using modern technology that lets you do these things? And I go back to what American hospitals and German hospitals look at every day, and if we'd had it amid staffs, have you got the people turning up? Is a good start, isn't it? And that's electronic. So I think the CQC, my sense is that they know what they need to get to. And to your point, I believe we all need to begin to be clear about what good looks like. because the danger at the moment is, unless we actually define it, one of these days we're going to end up with a hell of a legal row, and somebody will challenge it. And then the question is, it'll be like a court case. Is your assertion based on fact? Show me the facts, or is it based on an episodic dip? And I think that will be the challenge that we have to deal with. I think, and I think that they know it. I do think they know it.
Peter Wenham knows. Peter's the new chairman. Watch this space. Look, I'm up against the bucket of time. I'm supposed to finish at 7:30, but I'll give you. Can you do it quickly? Go on.
You mentioned.
Who are you?
I'm Alexandra Hammond. I'm head of environmental sustainability at Guys.
Right.
You mentioned that you figured out yesterday how you were going to deliver your report. Can you illuminate us?
How do you?
We want to deliver it. We just want to know how.
We'll just get on and do it.
No, the answer is that as we've already started sharing data with people. And then the question we want to know is, do you recognise that data? And if you don't, why not? Because if you're out of field, we'd like to know. You've got particular issues of guys. So, but in the end, get to what is real and agreeable to it.
Share the data with us. We'll publish it for you. Right.
Definitely.
One quick. Shane.
Very quickly. I think working in health takes courage, and I think leading in health takes great courage. And we've discussed some of the challenges for CEOs and other things. Your report and the way you present it, I admire the pragmatism around it. But I just wonder if you have any words of wisdom for those people who out there are working in a low-risk industry with little reward for being courageous and making some of these changes.
I went to a healthcare conference in the United States some years ago, and they had hired the man who'd run IBM. He wrote a book called Elephants, or Who Says Elephants Can't Dance?
Rosabeth Moscanto?
No.
Harvard?
Lou Gerstner. Okay, anybody now? Lou Gerstner, and Lou Gerstner was paid $250,000 to give 2 speeches of 1 hour each, and that apparently wasn't easy because the row was how big was the jet that picked him up? Could he stand up in it or not? Anyway, that gives you a little context. Very successful conference. Mr. Gerstner gets up and he comes to the podium and he gives us the standard leadership speech, right, with a little bit stuck in for healthcare. And we listen, and it's, and he's going to give us a copy of the book. A very nice lady, and you have to say who you are, sticks her hand up, and she's Joyce from the Baptist Healthcare System in Nashville or something like this. And she says, "Oh, Mr. Gerstner, that's a wonderful thing, As we go back to our hospitals, you're a great leader. What do you think the main motivational factors are that we should share with our staff?" And he looked at us as if we were dirt, and he said, "Fear and greed." Now, I answer your question by saying, actually, the NHS is a noble cause. And if we can hang on to that, and we will get through this period, we have got, with Jim Mackey and Ed, we've got a chance. But we all have to do our bit. We can't just sit there and say business as usual. And believe you me, the Treasury, even if the Treasury bails again, let me give you the numbers. The NHS in England consumes the whole of VAT. National VAT is 120 billion a year. That is it. And it all comes to the NHS in England. Forget the Scots and the Welsh and the Irish. It all comes to us. Every billion, and there are mathematicians, every billion we need or we can't find, it's going to go on a tax because we can't borrow anymore. So if you see the numbers like that, we are at the buffers. And the odd billion here and there may help us out, but it ain't going to solve it. And we have to solve it. And I believe people can. Actually, I am actually surprisingly optimistic about our ability to do it. I do think we have a leadership thing, and I think in Jim we've got that. I do think we have been very poor at technology. I really do. But the key lies within the institutions that deliver that care. And I believe actually with help people can get there, but it has to be help. We can't bully people into this. This is not a bullying culture. But on the other hand, nor should we tolerate actually slackness and people bunking off and actually not leading their organisations properly. There we are.
And that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much. We always, the regulars will know, we always give our guests a little gift. It's a bottle of whiskey.
Oh, thank you.
But it's not ordinary whiskey. It's Welsh whiskey. And it's the finest whiskey ever made.
Brilliant.
And the good thing about it is it's quite expensive, and it's just over the level at which it has to be in your declaration of interest. And we just want to be there.
Well, thank you, Roy.
We've had a great evening. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much. Coming up with
Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget Duncan Selby is our guest in June. Book quickly, tickets are flying out. Thank you.
Yeah. I was just thinking about Lou Gerstner's people suing me on Twitter.